conscious investor. I've got a very special guest with us this evening for those that are watching live or from the recording. And tonight we're covering off on stepping into financial freedom and proven strategies for 8% plus property yields. I've known Kevin Doodney for over 10 years now, and like I was sharing earlier, I'm sort of very selective, as I'm sure many of us here are, about who we deal with and who we associate with. So, Kevin Doodney, thank you for joining us.
It is certainly my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me to your wonderful.
It's great to have you with us, and I think there's a lot of people that are in the space that have been involved with property before, been involved with projects, etc. They've got some concerns in the market about like potentially where the market's going, and I've always been a big advocate of positively geared properties, and I think a lot of people have sort of cast aspersions on that. I know negative gearing's been heavily weighted, and also there's a lot of people have been promoting negative gearing lately, but I'm certainly keen to connect in with you again and find out what you've got to share with us tonight around positive property yields, etc., moving forward, particularly into the next 10 years before we have the Olympic Games, particularly coming up on the east coast of Australia shortly. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you've got to share with us.
Thank you, Paul. And in answer to the question there, negative gearing's been around all along. It's the weirdest thing on the planet. The go and lose money so that you can have capital growth is just like prey. It's just ridiculous. You have to sort of think differently. Your money needs to work that. And I think tonight we'll go through slide by slide. Some I'll jump through quickly. They're probably, not necessarily of your people, but
yes. So for the people, sorry, Kevin, sorry to cut you off. We get a little bit of a delay. For the people that haven't met you before or haven't had any dealings, can you give us a little bit of background? I know you were involved with the Housing Task Force previously. Can you give us a little bit of background on your involvement in the property space in Australia?
Sure. I came into the property space in 79 and devoted my life to development side, which is working with Stockland, Mirvac, Lend-Lease, all those. And in fact, I'll jump a slide there. These are just some of the people that I at that time. Supercheap Auto, he had quite a few subdivisions. The ministers for planning, both state, local, federal. We did a NALA for the state government, 770 homes in reinvigorating that particular. By about 30 years of working with developers, I just didn't want more. So I chose to create a housing task force in parallel with working with developers in 2009. The housing task force was all about the side. Where will we be in 10 years and 12, and what would the housing be like, and we deliver for people at that? Why we have to think out 10 years? The planning laws in Queensland or Australia, when you buy a subdivision of some size, as an example, it takes 15 years to get a subdivision approval. So you need to think ahead, because it takes 15 years a subdivision approved in Australia in varying times from state to state, depending on the mood of the government at the time. But in Queensland, it's still 15 years plus. So we have a decade and a half. We are in a lot of trouble.
Interesting. So I think people are keen about sort of getting some information about like what opportunities are available, what's the market sort of projecting. There's always negative aspersions that are created in the market, lack of confidence. We've got a housing crisis in Australia where there's many Australians that are sort of living in caravans and tent cities and that thing across the country. And somehow in its inherent wisdom, the government is out to introduce another 1.15 immigrants into Australia over the next 2 years as well. So
1.5 million, in fact.
Right. Okay, I stand corrected.
Yeah. Well, you got the million. It's all. It's a big number. And and we've got a waiting list of 30 affordable housing. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. It's a massive problem. It's huge. We call it the working homeless. Quite remarkable. And in fact, in task force, when they came up with this particular to launch around about now, working on this in 2015, which is right years ago, and we tested it in Melbourne, we moved it to Brisbane. The goal that we had, each particular space is cheaper than a powered tent site nearest to it. So that's in terms of providing something that is based on the cost of a powered tent site, between $54 a night, $22 a night in peak season in the Brisbane region. Yes. So we creating affordable spaces, and which is good to us. And every time one of our investors builds what we build, we're providing homes for another 5 people, and that's very, very important to us.
Absolutely.
Would you like me to get on with the show, as they say?
Yes, please. Absolutely.
Then away we go.
Thanks.
Particularly, my disclosure has said in the last 40 years or more, don't try it at home without at least checking people who've at least tried it. It more says that we have done crazy things and got away with it. For that, Paul, is I've spent, as I said before, 5 years of my life in charge of stock land and lease and all those guys, and if you make a mistake in design or deliverable of their land estates. So most of my time is fixing problems and learning from those, and hopefully not repeating mistakes. And history is full of people bother to check it and then end up repeating it. Don't. So I'm saying there is, it's advice, professional advice, but what we've done 4.5 decades is devote that and all of my team behind me to do that. Your people on tonight is wonderful people that is currently in the process of division and building a rooming Chermside in the next. So you've got a live one there tonight. Hi, one of the people we know that we're helping right now is great. Nice to have the home team there. So yeah, what we're saying is that the whole trick to this is to be negatively geared where possible, and that's pretty tricky when interest rates are where at the moment. We also process where everything we put into the home is harvestable. So we've got $27,000 furniture that you're depreciating within a period of 2 years, which creates a huge break. So rather than try and go down the negative gearing, what we go down the path of is decent ways of getting tax breaks, but on the same time, where you're building a 5-bedroom home, which is probably getting about 40,000, maybe 50,000 a year, our homes are getting closer to 100,000 a year, whilst creating affordable spaces for 5 families or 5 people in this particular case. So we looked at the last 10 years, and our motto is to create a difference. Why do we call it that? Because when you build one of these 5 people and you're creating space, nurses and firemen and first responders and a bunch of people, government, semi-government, people in fact, you're actually giving someone a space and market out there. It's about 21% of Australia single, in America now 42% single. And so we're heading down that trend. Single dwelling is the largest market and continuing to grow, particularly on the back picks and so many other things. So people like Richard, I won't bother detail, but Richard came into our life from Sydney. My job was to find the block of land, the whole thing, right down to handover to tenants. We do is seamlessly from start finish to handover to tenancy. So we make the assumption that our clients either don't have time or don't have the skill set. It's just one of our testimonials.
We just moved and we're looking for investment, and a fast track would be.
And that's kind of where he went from there, but it's so we won't bother with that. So you mentioned before negative gearing, and what I'm saying is the issue is you either run out of capital or you run out of ability, because the first time you buy is a loss. At the bank, look, I've got this great idea. I want to buy a house for $800,000 in Brisbane, or Vulture actually. That's called a first home these days. It's going to rent for $400 a week or around that, maybe $500 on a good day. It's going to get, even if you like $600,000, it's going to be a loss to you of around 2.8%. But the money you borrow much higher level than that. So fundamentally, once you buy one, you go back to the bank and say, hey, I lost a heap of money on the first one. Can I do it? And they kind of look at you and say, well, no. Or depends on your equity. And if you've got a lot of equity and you put more money in, because the banks are there to give you an umbrella, and the second it starts raining, they will take back. So basically, fan of the concept of running out of capital serviceability. It's just ridiculous. money work at 2% or less when you can work at 8% or more, because that's the whole. So low yields is the enemy, and equity. If something goes up in value and you're prime growth, you can't eat that. It's just on, and you only transition to that if you sell it. Of course, you're creating capital gains tax. I call our stuff legacy housing. If you get into one of our homes, you don't want to return in cash of $100,000 or better instances. So, you're feeling good about creating 5 sacred spaces, but if there's capital growth, but ours are more commercial in the sense that when they resell, they sell on a commercial around 5.6%, and we produce them with a minimum percent. So they do have built-in capital growth for that reason. Particularly, we don't count asset rich if poor. A lot of people have portfolios that are weeds. They're just not producing the money, and they can't keep going. They can't keep. So if you haven't got the cash flow, you allow for mistakes. You're in real trouble. And it takes time to sell an asset like house. And when you have to sell it, the market's at a point where you don't want to sell it. So you need to be, a little more to not concern yourself about cycles. Flow replaces cycles. Basically, what we're saying is we want to get people to do cash flow rather than a comfort zone and start moving out to where the magic actually is. So we concept of cash flow positive. It's very, very important. You still get the negative gearing benefits, and that's important. The bottom line is it means that people who have a memory of arc. They seem to believe that the way to go is to bedroom home, and in its day, workable. But you need to be reminded. A block of land in Brisbane was $6,000 for 600 square meters in 2000, and that same block is now dollars. And you can't just put another 4-bedroom home and expect to get the return that you did when that block was $69,000 and only $80 to build a house on it. So we were getting the returns that we're getting. So we need to open our mind to new ways. And so we do believe there's a better way. And the basic principle is if you work for money, you're giving the power to someone else. And if you have the money work, you do have a chance to control that power. So we're not saying don't keep your job, but we are saying it's for just over broke. And people who get an increase in pay just simply get a better car based on the plane or maybe a better holiday, but have multiple ways of creating income outside of your job. And so that's big on this magic of number 8. And there it is on a growing for you, that if you bothered to put, say, call it 1.25 million as a number, 1.25 million will get you $1,000 a year using the model that we do, whereas something at 2.5% is somewhere around about $25 to $30 a year. And that's not enough to really work. It just doesn't work for you that way. So you really make sure your money is working hard, and the number we always hit when we're talking about what we do doesn't match that number, we don't do it. And that's particularly challenging when land in places like Manly and Wynnum have gone up from $400,000 a block to $700,000 a block in the last 3 years. So, we are constantly working with land acquisitions, and thank goodness I've had 45 years in land, because it's given me that benefit, I guess, to know what to look for.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the key is 8% accelerates time, Paul, more than anything, and it does replace your income in time. If you've got 3 things earning $100,000 a year, and let's presume you were using cash at the time, then you're getting an income of $300,000, less the running costs of the homes, which we'll show you, because like you, I'm full transparency in what we do. And I like to show people all the costs associated with this, all the pros and cons as well. And so that's the key to this. People ask questions like, can you oversupply the market? No, we can't. 21% of Australians are single, 42% in America. And we've got the Olympics coming on our back with tons of people coming every week into Southeast Queensland, 880 new cars and over 1,000 people a week, before our revered leader is decided to import another 1.1 million people, and a lot of those are single because they're after jobs. And Queensland is the powerhouse for jobs. Our Port of Brisbane has now moved to number 1 in the Southern Hemisphere. And the Brisbane Airport Corporation, one of our biggest employers, is now building another terminal and a whole bunch of other stuff. Between those two alone, that's $10 billion in income, in expenditure. I mean, that's a lot of jobs.
That's a lot.
Yeah. So basically, we are probably the largest provider of rooming houses in Brisbane because of our collaboration. The Future Housing Task Force has collaborated with the High Yield Group because the Future Housing Task Force is the think tank that creates all these new products that we've done. And we make sure that we have great partners to allow us to do it. To give an example, Paul, this year so far, we've done 50 million in placements for rooming houses in Brisbane alone. Outside of that, probably about another 5 or 6 million, not much outside of Brisbane. The why is because Brisbane, we've managed to do it in a way that there are no infrastructure charges. And that's $105,000 that we don't have to pay. Whereas in Moreton, that's $100,000. Sunshine Coast the same, Gold Coast the same, Ipswich, Logan, all the same. And most of those also require a full development approval. Whereas for us, within 4 weeks of you getting the land, we can start construction because it's just externally certified with no council approval required and no government data to deal with. So we've removed all the uncertainty in Brisbane, whereas there is uncertainty in the other councils. However, we are dealing with them on a day-to-day basis to explain maybe an error in their ways and how they're currently addressing the town plan. But I did mention to you before that it is a 15-year goal to change the town plan. And so it is a long, long journey. Our system is pretty simple. Our client gets to market ready. We move then to sourcing the land and the builders. The builder I'm working with, I've worked with since 1981. His subcontractors have been with him also since 1981, and his children and his grandchildren are still working in that industry as well. So it's very much a family business, and that's what we love, is the concept of people that we can actually form a relationship with over the long term, because in the building industry, we've lost thousands of builders in the last few years. Our builder is not in the business of buying a new beach house or going on world trips. He just loves building houses, and he's very, very good at it. We liaise with all of that. We've got building completion and external expansion teams so that once the house is built, we bring in independent people to make sure it's built in accordance with the national building codes. We deal with all the new changes. In the last month, we've gone from category 6 to 7 in terms of livability, which means we've got to do a whole new bunch of things. And then July 1, we also had to increase the width of hallways because every home now has to be wheelchair accessible. And so we're constantly dealing with new government regulations to find a new way to kill the market. And that's what they're about, can't change that. And they shouldn't do that, because in every home that is a first home buyer, as an example, for 800,000 in Caboolture, $240,000 of that is taxes and charges that the government makes. So they really should be mindful of the fact that they're killing the biggest income earner that they've ever had in history.
Wow.
And so, it's a problem. And the banks are at a point now where they are having difficulty lending to a first home buyer who needs to have $160,000 in Brisbane in savings just to meet the criteria that the bank has to supply. And they can't go into a cheap rental because there are no cheap rentals. And so they can't really save. So it's a cycle that they're having trouble with. And we've now got the Gen Zs and the millennials all lining up in the next 5 years to buy real estate. It is their single biggest goal. That's before we talk about 1.1 million people that we have to house that we haven't yet met. So, it normally takes us 35 years to breed a first home buyer. We're importing 1 million of them.
Yes.
That's really quite interesting with a 15-year wait to get land.
Yeah.
Tenants, we source the whole thing, depreciation schedule. Our tenants are not students. They are people that earn anywhere from 50 to 60,000. Why? Because we can only take into account 30 to 40% of their income. Normally 30 is the criteria, but because we supply the house with no power bills and no water bills and no internet bills, and it's fully furnished, they don't have any other costs to consider that they do when they're renting a house. Because when they rent a house, it's not only the rent, it's all those power suppliers, water suppliers, internet suppliers, and furniture that they have to apply to be able to place homes. So we supply all of that, including courtyards and their own everything. So it's really nice to have all of that. Right. The uplift I mentioned before is because we supply it at an 8%, but every resale of a rooming house is 6%. So that difference is around to 200K. So producing it around 1.1 million house. They tend to value it on handover. So that has happened in the last 45 resales. We have a lot of resales. It happens because people decide on from their relationships or banks or some other thing. But fundamentally, most people hold on long term because of the incomes they have. Location, part of what we do. 90 of all of our rooming houses, a railway station or a bus. Others are closer to the city, so we're not that concerned about train. It may be bus. One of your clients tonight on there is building in Chermside as an example. We're not running a train there, but we've got tons of buses there, and we've got hospitals there. We've got all of the major links there, and it's so close to the city. It's a great location. We just sold another one in Everton Hills with city views only 2 weeks ago. And when you look at master planned estates in Rochedale, which is a suburb of Brisbane on the south side, they're getting $1 million now for 300 square metres, and we're still acquiring 300 square metre blocks closer to the city for 550 and 580. So, you know, much better value because of what we look at. Why Brisbane? Well, there's a lot of reasons, really. We've got the biggest rental crisis. Why? Well, because we've got the most jobs, and jobs create housing. One job equals one house. If someone gets a job, they've got to have shelter. If they don't have shelter, they can't take the job. It's that simple. So, for instance, a hospital in Kingscliff, they can't build it to the size they want because they can't house the nurses because they don't have the accommodation in Kingscliff. And so if you can't have accommodation, you can't have workers. And so the fundamental issue that we're facing in Queensland and Australia generally is, even though we've got lots of jobs, we don't have lots of houses. And so we need a mixture of products to be able to provide housing for people. Obviously, if you haven't been reading the newspapers, it's been a crisis for a while. Albanese said he built 200,000 homes. I think he's built 2 so far, maybe. So he's got a way to go. In terms of that, state government's the same. They're not doing anything, and local government are not in the business of providing housing. They're in the business of getting rid of your garbage, fixing potholes, and generally speaking, day-to-day stuff that concerns you. We're the most overgoverned country in the world based on our population, and 10% of all the people waiting for housing are people that work in government. And so a lot of our tenants are government because they work in government jobs, such as firemen, nurses, doctors, all those sort of things. And it is cheaper for a doctor to take one of our rooms at $385 a week fully furnished than it is to come up and stay in a hotel for 5 days and then go back home. You know, now finding new markets such as supported independent living, who are taking our homes on contract for 1 year to 2 years at a time because there is such a waiting list through NDIS and other things. And so because our homes have their own bathrooms, their own kitchens, lounge, dining, bathrooms, and courtyards, they're ideal for supported independent living as well. So basically, with the population change, and the biggest problem is the $15 billion pipeline, they're still arguing as to where they're going to build the stadium. You know, could be North Shore, could be the Gabba, could be anywhere. Who cares? But the point that we are making is Brisbane has committed to the Olympic Games. It's not quite like saying I'll take the chicken gate, such as they did in the Commonwealth Games. That is just the Commonwealth Games. This is the Olympic Games. Once you're in, you're in. And, you know, the Star Casino opens tomorrow as a test run, which is the biggest change to Queensland's history, meaning that we're now world class in terms of getting a cup of coffee. That's got 50 restaurants alone in it. And so when you start getting backers like that, it doesn't get much bigger than that. We've got bridges crossing rivers. We've got holes in the ground with tunnels going everywhere. We've got Cross River Rail. It's just an endless procession of money being poured out. God knows how long it'll take to pay it back after 2032. But for 10 years, party, Brisbane's the place to be. But after that, that's a whole war game.
I remember for those that were here in Brisbane for World Expo 88 as well, the impact of World Expo 88 on Brisbane property prices back then as well, Kevin.
Massive.
Yeah.
Absolutely massive. So as I mentioned before, a bit of a heat map, if you like. You can see there that we've got a tremendous effort here on the north side, which is around Boondall, Aspley, Deagon, Brighton. All these areas have one thing in common: trains. Over here in Darra, trains. Over here in Sunnybank, trains. And over here in Wynnum, trains. Where they're not trains, places like Acacia Ridge, but lots of buses. Chermsides, Fairfields, all through there, lots of buses, but mostly 90% of ours are very close to transport for train. Trains aren't used in Brisbane. That's because we're running about 165 people per square kilometre. In Sydney, Melbourne, they're running 440 people or more per square kilometre. We are a population short of a proposition in Brisbane, and we are punching above our weight in terms of capital growth. So I don't see that as a crash as much as I do a soft landing only for the 4-bedroom stock. Our stock is immune from that because we're about cash flow, not about capital growth. We catch the capital growth if there is any, but we're not about that. We're about cash flow. And so that's the key to what we do. That's just a heat map showing you the effort that goes into that. And as I mentioned before, we've got 50 million deployed in Brisbane so far this year, with another 40 million pledged for the end of December, I'm sorry. So yeah, that means we'll be handing over 500 rooms that are affordable and cheaper than a powered tent site to people with no power bills or water bills or any other things. So our demographic is there because we can only take into account a percentage of their income. So most of the people that we have earn a minimum of $55,000 a year. And that's because we're taking nearly $20,000 off them a year per room. So, you know, they need to be earning at least close to $60,000 a year to apply. So we are not student accommodation. We are very much essential workers. Household size is changing. You can see there just a basic graph that shows one-person households are growing at tremendous speed, around about 21 to 23% at the moment, and growing compared to America at 42%. It'll be the biggest change in household size. And the government are only producing houses of 4 or 5 bedrooms. So they have a waiting list, which is beyond reckoning. And they are not doing anything about it. The same with community housing providers. They're still building 4-bedroom stock. So we have a clear run for probably 30 or 40 years, and we cannot match the number of people that want this accommodation. So whilst we can't access the individual ROI data from all the houses, we can at least talk to you about the fact that the average rent we're getting now is $385 per week. We allow for 4% vacancy, even though it's running at close to zero. We still allow for that. We are conservative. And it's $385 per week times the 150 rooms under management with one of our asset managers. They have zero vacancy. A couple of break leases here and there because people fall in love. Why do I mention that? Because only one person per room. You can't have a couple in the room. It's 5 unrelated parties. So if they fall in love or decide to have a partner, they can't stay in our accommodation. It's time to move out. That's dictated by the state government, and they haven't changed that law. And until they do, we can't do anything about it. I'll give you a peek at what a rooming house looks like, if that's okay, so people can get a visual understanding, because that's pretty important. This one was just handed over recently. What you're coming into is the common area. Each rooming house must have a common area, even though it's not used, and it must have a common laundry, because one laundry is one dwelling. If we put a laundry in each home, that would trigger unit accommodation. You're now in the first room, which is a wheelchair access room. By law, we have to create one for wheelchair access. So that's why the wide doors, big turning circles, and other things. So that's all part of what we do. As you can see, the kitchens are there, bathrooms, much bigger bathroom because it's wheelchair access in this particular one. In 10 years, we haven't rented one to a wheelchair access person, and it's normally one of the first rooms to go because it's bigger. This is a normal room. By normal, I mean the average size around 30 to 31 square meters, which is ideal in size. We used to make them bigger, but they don't return any more money. There's a law of diminishing return, which shows that anything over a certain size doesn't get you any more money. So that's typical of a room. Hallways are now wider to allow for wheelchair access as part of the new National Building Code. Each room has a courtyard, and we make sure that our bedrooms are full queen size, even though it's one person, and we make it a bedroom rather than a motel style room, because we like them to feel that they have a home. So when they shut that door at night, even though they're on their own, they feel more comfortable in their bedroom, which is air conditioned and has fans as well. Storage space for lockers in this particular one. And lots of light, lots of air. Those benches are now wider. That's 1.3 meter benches. We're now at 1.8. So we've made the benches bigger because we're finding that we have to accommodate new things like air fryers and other things. As people start to bring their own toys in, they're starting to buy Webbers for the outdoor patios, things of that nature. It is their home, but we supply everything: knives, forks, spoons. We do not supply linen. That has been staged. It's against the law to supply linen and pillows. We can only supply mattress covers. We provide the house with no power bills, as I mentioned before, but we put 13.5 kilowatts of power on the roof. So therefore, we're producing a very large amount of power from our solar systems, and we put in 3-phase power. That's an example of the courtyard you're getting there for that tenancy. It's like a home within a home. And the build time on that one was less than 6 months. It was 5 months from start to finish on that one. By law, we allow 10 months to build them under the QMBA contracts, but our current build times are sitting around 6 months. Why? Because our builder's got the same teams that he's had since 1981. So they know how to build stuff, and they do it very, very well. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more of an understanding about how our homes look.
Yeah, that's great.
It just is nice and neat. But that area there, that oven will not be used. 2 years from now, it'll still be as it was. So it's a 2-part contract. Some of our homes can be a 1-part with self-managed super funds, but it means we have to build it and finish it, which means from the day they settle it, the tenants move in. So much quicker income streams for the first 1-part contracts, but they are dearer to buy by about 150,000 more because of double stamp duties, double everything, because the client has to buy the land, finance it, build it, transfer it over to them, legal costs and other things. So 2-part is the best way to do it. And each rooming house has a shared laundry and a shared full kitchen, which, again, nobody uses. The laundry, on the other hand, they use that a lot. We provide 2 washing machines. The tenants prefer to use their own cooking facility, of course. Their favourite thing to eat is Uber. And they love to complain about one thing. It's always the speed of the internet, because it's a big thing for them. They come home, Netflix, Uber, that's it. Sleep, up, gone again. We look at the best places to build in 2024-25, profitable designs. We're constantly addressing changes to our homes. We call it a gold standard. These were 2 we built in Wynnum, currently producing 200,000 per annum gross. Roughly off the top, you would probably say that of every 100,000 you're earning, you will spend about $20,000 to $25,000 of that in management fees, power bills, water bills, rates, taxes, maintenance, everything. And we'll show you those in greater numbers a little later. Zilmere, Durac, they're all sitting around the same, which averaging, Paul, 385 a week conservatively is what we're getting, 150 rooms at the moment. You can see the quality of them is very high, and the furniture packs are very, very powerful. We buy a lot of furniture. Keep in mind, we have furnished so far this year 250 rooms.
Wow.
The common areas, that is a lot of fridges, a lot of stoves, a lot of everything, So we do buy well. We talked about the resale of them. They tend to sell on a 6% yield, 5.8 to 6. The last 50 have been that. Typical floor plan, looking at it from a bird's eye view, you can see here that you've got the bigger one here, which is in this case, accessibles and so forth and so on. But generally speaking, courtyards are here, also courtyards to the sides and there, and another courtyard to the front. Each one has its own clothesline, so that they've got the privacy. We're the only one producing individual courtyards, individual clotheslines. Others are shared. We don't like that. Colour schemes, we've got them all sorted, both digitally, and we have a live office. If you want to walk into our office at North Lakes, we can help you to select the colours that way as well. We do tours a lot and other things, but it's really great to see them handing over like this. And again, I remind you that they're 1.3 metre kitchens. We've moved to 1.8 on all of our new ones going forward because of the need for more bench space, because people are bringing more things in.
Yes.
An example of our bathrooms are that the showers are quite large. Males seem to like large showers, and our females tend to like more storage space. So, we provide both of those things as much as we can. Examples of previous builds in the last 6 months are through Acacia Ridge, Aspley, Wacol, Boondall, Brighton is very popular, Coopers Plains, Darra, also through Deegan there, Gaythorne, Mitchelton, Oxley, Again, mostly train stations, Oxley, Richlands, River Hills, Rockley, Tingalpa, Wacol again, good train stations there. Wynnum was very popular when it was cheaper. It's getting dearer now. It's jumped quite substantially, as has a lot of areas. Now, we talked earlier about running costs. That shows you there, on average, across the last 50 rooming houses, we've managed to get the management fees down to 8%, which is very good. In Melbourne, it's 25%. So, 8% is less than a lot of people charge to manage a home. We're managing 5 tenants within that. And we sign them up on both the Residential Tenancies Authority, but the most important one is the rooming house rules, which means if they break them, they're out in 24 hours. And so we don't have a problem with difficult tenants. We haven't had to evict very often. It's either been a mental health issue that wasn't disclosed because we are not social housing, we're affordable housing. Or somebody decided they wanted to smoke things and grow them in their room or something like that. So, generally speaking, we can't afford the power bill for that. So, we need to be mindful of that. We've only got 13.5 kilowatts of power there, Paul.
Yes.
So basically 23,000 is spent in things like fire safety inspections, because we've got lit signs that have to be checked, and we've got all sorts of things you have to spray on if the fire goes on, blankets and evacuation plans, a whole bunch of stuff, because we're building a commercial building here. Gardening, cleaning, rates, NBN, electricity, water, they all add up, and that essentially means that that's your outgoing. So on say 100 grand, let's call it that, you should end up with about 75 of that, less your mortgage cost. So the goal is to get in while you've got a job, because then you can write off so many of these things with depreciation that is not taken into account here. Vacancy risk is always a question. We are dealing with close to zero vacancy, but we allow 1 month to rent. Oversupply, I've addressed that. Tenancy risk, we've addressed that. Location risk refers to the fact that even though people don't use our trains or our buses, and you can get them for 50 cents at the moment for that reason, it's not to say that they're not valuable. If I want to put in a train station into a new estate, that's 1.2 billion. They're not cheap. They're probably one of the most expensive toys to play with, and not easy to, put a rail in. Getting messy these days to do that. So, it's nice to take advantage of public transport as we grow from 165 per square kilometre to 400, which will happen over the next 8 to 10 years. So we will be a big city, because every city that's ever done the Olympics has a massive, massive change in their markets. It's always historically the case. So I guess the where to from here is you can either do it yourself or allow somebody else to do it for you. And our partnership with you, Paul, is with your clients, as you know, and we're currently building one for one of your clients. And you took probably a good year to decide what it was that you wanted to do. And we're very patient. We believe in the rules of rush slowly. No issue with that. We run at your pace, not ours. And option one is, if you want to do it yourself, there is a lot to know. There really is. Something as simple as a tree in the way costs you $3,000 to move. You've got to get access with a driveway. You've got all sorts of build over sewer issues and other things. So there's a lot that we have to take into account when we're selecting a block of land, a lot. And I've always learned in life that confusion generally equals no. So once people get confused, they just don't do anything and say it's all too hard. And the biggest complaint about Gen Z and Gen coming in, millennials, is that they're confused. They don't know how to deal with the things. So they're just going, this is just all too hard. I'm going back to my avocado on toast. It's difficult.
Yeah.
Nigel's one of our clients. We've got him to over $1 million now in cash flow in Newcastle. Different down there. They do next generation boarding houses, not rooming houses. And you can build up to 32 rooms in one block of land.
Wow.
That is a big exercise of cost, whereas we prefer to have 10 rooming houses over 10 blocks rather than one big one on one block. We don't like that. We like minimizing risk by spreading it across a number of areas. But Sydney, and that's how they do it. And Nigel enjoys that, and he gets a real buzz out of it. So basically, it's a system. We touched on this before. It's all about solving the rental crisis. That's what we're there for. The task force was designed and built around that whole product model. It's a micro rent process where each room is around 30 square meters or more. There's no development application. We're fast to construct, about 26 weeks building time. The contract allows 10 months under a QMBA contract in case of something like a COVID. I'm not sure if they're due to release that again. I'll have to check that.
Mhm.
But you know, we have to allow for those things to happen. High yield for investors, surging current and future demand, high social impact, solar panel powered, always major capital cities. We can go regional and get them a lot cheaper, but regional, you know, you go to somewhere like Maribor and you might be dealing with maybe 10,000 people. You know, it's not a big population. In fact,
Yes.
it's 8,000. They've
Mm.
only just got a Macca's there, you know.
Mm.
So basically it's tricky. So we prefer big population areas. We prefer to do the whole thing for you. Again, you can do it yourself if you want. That gives you full access to me as your coach during the time of your build. And we allow for up to 5 rooming houses during your time with us in terms of what we do. We have a very big teaching program that all of your clients get to be part of because of our arrangement with you, Paul. So they can get into this and learn from all of our lessons that we put on there every month. We do webinars for 10 months a year, and we have lots of speakers there from our builders and our asset managers and all sorts of people that we bring on board from time to time to talk about their story. That's our ecosystem in a different way, where we just look at how we do the handovers, the quantity surveyors, the management teams. It's a big team. We've got in-house our own architects, our own engineers, and our own quantity surveyors. Our own property management teams are outsourced, but under an agreement. And if they break those agreements, we will change property management teams. So it's a big team. Stephanie and
Kevin,
John.
well, we're on the look for a better residential and housing return and options, and then we quite sort of accidentally bumped into you guys, and then we looked at it and we thought, wow, that ticks all the boxes. You guys are looking to provide this housing for those that aren't as fortunate as everyone else, and it's a great investor outcome as well. So it sort of ticked all the boxes for us.
Look, I think communication was obviously a high priority when you're dealing with people that you haven't physically met, as you said. You're working within the different time zones and things. So I felt that all the way along, having all the information very transparent through the process, the explanations that you guys gave, the time frames, the follow-ups if things didn't work to plan and why, were really critical for us to keep confidence and to keep both ourselves invested in the process and seeing the outcome that we did within the time frame that you had set, which I think was initially I thought was quite ambitious. You know, trying to get something built in about 9 months, but it works. Obviously, you've been doing it for a long time. You've got existing relationships with builders and, you know, that's that whole level of marketing within the system and process of once it is built, you know, then getting it tenanted. So for us as, I suppose, remote investors and people that don't have the experience locally, it was a really good process. And and for us to see that, you know, the previews of what you've done beforehand really, I suppose, gave us confidence. Purpose, as you said, is a big deal for us as well, making sure that we're making a difference from an ethical perspective as well as from an investment perspective.
So fundamentally, that couple, John and Steph, lived in Port Hedland. John's never left Port Hedland. The first time he's ever left Port Hedland was about last year when he came and saw his rooming house. And, you know, we introduced him to things like Queensland. And so we do have for a lot of clients that simply aren't in the country or have no plans to be in Queensland, but they just want to move their funds to Queensland, and we tend to look after it for them. So our system is quite simple, done for you deals. We've got the builders, we've got the network, we source the land, and we make sure the land's ready. Anyone who buys a block, we insist it's always subject to finance, so we can have a closer look under the bonnet to make sure that everything is there and ready to go. We've got a gold standard, which is our minimum standard that we hit. Every room must be a certain size. Every room must have a certain size kitchen. It must meet our standard. We work on the fastest construction time in the industry, currently running at 6 months, sometimes better. We look at the best value. Our builder has quoted on 100 rooming houses. So we've got the best price by far. We're building around about Metricon pricing at around $2,500 a metre. And that is for a home that has got 6 wet areas, and it's particularly difficult to build because each one has a lot of wet areas and they're building in 30 square metre spaces. So it does require some really specialised people to do that. We leverage our ecosystem through our 20-year plus relationships. We avoid the headaches because we're not going through council approvals. You can either be an armchair rooming house developer or you can work side by side with me and learn as you go if that's your thing. We don't mind either way. So basically, we're not saying the strategy is for everyone, but if you want to book in a strategy call, that is with you, Paul.
Mhm.
Once you do that, of course, you can find out if that's a fit for them. If it's not, you and I can talk about what isn't right for them, and we might have to find some other product that
Yes.
still gives them a return. This might be too dear for them, or other things. You know, we've had people that have chosen to go together and buy one house between them. We're
Mm.
working at the moment where potentially we could do it as tenants in common, where 5 people could own a room each and still get the same return,
Yes.
and bring them down to something like 250,000 per room, roughly. You know.
Mm.
And try to create different ways of getting them into real estate,
Mhm.
like a BrickX model, but with a bit more
Yes.
control. So it really is up to them. I imagine you've got the time to spend with them, and I wanted to make sure we zing past that in 45 minutes, which we're on the clock on, so that you could allow for some questions there, if that's okay.
That's great. And I'll stop the recording shortly so we can ask some of the private questions and that sort of thing. But I've got some questions myself that you may have dealt with, or I know it comes up from clients from time to time. And if anyone that's interested at this point in time, you can go to paulseils.com and jump in and book a call with me, and just book a 15-minute session, or just chat as long as we need to get across it. That's Paul Seils, SEILS.com. But my question for you, Kevin, is really around, like, a lot of people got questions around super funds and that sort of thing, about what they can do, what they need to borrow as far as super funds, if they want to get property involved, as far as the super funds are concerned. What's your experience in that regard?
Oh, super funds, you're going to need about $250,000, maybe $300,000 of cash to be
Right.
able to do it in a super fund.
Mhm.
We've had King's Council at the moment give us advice as to whether we can do it in super, and according to them, we can. We're still seeking an ATO ruling, because nothing more scary than people with 3 letters.
Yes.
And ATO's got 3 letters, and we don't like that. So once they give us advice, we believe we can move into a single part contract with our model, but that won't be until early next year. In the meantime, to make a superannuation work, either they'd have to do an arm's length transaction where they lend the money to the builder, and then he builds it and then pays interest on the money lent to him and then hands it over on completion. But that does trigger double stamp duties and other things. Or we can build a spec and sell it straight to their superannuation fund. We've got one in Wynnum that we put on the market this morning. That's going under contract tonight at 1.35 million in Wynnum. And that will come with all the tenants in place at settlement.
Yes.
So instead of waiting for the build time, you're straight in income straight away. We can do it, but we need to know how many clients we've got to deal with on that. And at the moment, we're doing about 10 a year that way.
Yes.
New model, once ATO says yes or no, we will have to lift that to probably 50 or more. So we're heading there. We're just not there yet, Paul.
Sure. Okay, great. I'm going to stop the recording there for the live stream side of things anyway. And then thanks for your time. Like I said, Kevin, we'll do updates from time to time. If anyone wants to any further information, just go to Paul Seils, SEILS.com. Just jump in and book a complimentary call there for a conversation. We'll have a chat about it further anyway. And yeah, get whatever your questions, etc., that you need answered in that regard.
No problems.
Okay.
I'm really happy, Paul, to have been here tonight with you, and it's really great to catch up with you. We've got so much in common, you and I.
Yeah, it's great.
And I love the fact that most of your people are very wide awake and well aware of what they need to do to look after themselves in
Yes.
probably the most exciting times in the history of mankind. I think it's
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the key now that I've stopped the live stream and that sort of thing as well. It's like getting across and having clients be diversified. Obviously, people got somewhere to live. They want to be able to have capital growth and cash flow positive, as also while solving the housing crisis for people. But, I'm always talking to clients all the time about strategy moving forward for the next 10 years, about diversification, super funds, cryptocurrency, precious metals, all that sort of thing as well. And I think the property aspect definitely needs to be addressed. And I think I didn't know whether you covered it fully in the demographics of your client base but what I'm observing in the market, particularly in Southeast Queensland, Kevin, is that the housing affordability stuff, the high percentage of demographics seems to be single females, like 50 to 70. Is that a correct assumption of?
No.
No.
The average age across the 155 units that we've got in one of our providers, which is Wilson Property Management, the average age there is 35 to 45. and the average age for the male is 45 to 52. However,
Wow.
you are right on the money. If we're in Wynnum or Brighton or anywhere
Okay.
by the seaside, it automatically jumps to 50.
Yes.
One of the biggest growths is a divorce over the age of 60 and looking for affordable accommodation just for one person. And so that tends to happen when we're by the seaside. So,
Okay.
so when we go seaside, yes, older demographic, but in
Yes.
the suburbs where we're near train stations and transport, it's all about how do I get to work? How do I get from work? How do I get onto Netflix? And how do I get my Uber Eats?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I can get why the appeal's there as well. It's like, you know, the numbers that you're talking about is like for rentals for apartments in Brisbane sort of 10 or 15 years ago. You know what I mean? I've
Yeah.
just got present to that when you were sharing it as well. Now it's like 700 plus, you know, $1,000 a week.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
But it's worse than that, Paul. They also then have to find water bills, electricity bills, NBN. So they've got to then do gardening, insurance for themselves. They've got to have all those things, pest and sprays. You know, it's a lot of stuff.
Yes.
And then they have to sign on to all those power bills, and it doesn't give them the flexibility to move out. You know, they can take our space for 6 months. They stay longer, but they tend to think they're only going to be there for 6 months. They're not.
Yeah.
They're there for more like 2 years. And they like it. Why wouldn't they? A lot of our clients in the construction industry rent our rooms and then jump on their four-wheel drive and go camping on the weekend.
Yes.
And they just lock their space up. Other people only occupy it for 2 or 3 nights a week because they're locums coming and going, cheaper than a hotel, but a better quality of space. So, you know, it's a whole bunch of different things.
Yes.
So,
Okay,
yeah.
great. Anything else you want to share in closing before I stop the recording and then send it out to the people that registered that wanted to listen to it later? And then I'll just see if there's anyone else here that's.
No, because what I love about you, Paul, is that you really are across everything we do, and I know that you're very competent in being able to answer the questions that you're asking me.
Yes.
And I'm right there with you all the way through this journey anyway.
Yeah.
So I'm only a phone call away from you or a phone call away from your clients if they decide to pursue this further.
Sure. Okay, fantastic, Kevin. Appreciate it.